A deadly conspiracy. With the help of Assistant District Attorney Catherine Kim in the King County Prosecutor's Domestic Violence Unit, Sue pursued her attempts to have Bill go to trial for felony harassment and for his violations of the no-contact order. Yet no one involved felt that charges against Bill would stick. Despite her police record, the young woman who lived with him was considered a credible witness. If Bill went to jail, as an ex-police officer, he would be in great danger. Another reason he might not be prosecuted as vigorously as an ordinary person on the street. Despite what had happened in the Brain case, Bill Jensen tended to come across as no more than an irritating, mean-spirited, and petulant man who was trying to make his wife miserable, which is not technically a crime. The woods and the divorce courts were full of men like that. Even with all of the guns he had, he himself didn't seem capable of real violence. Except for the 2001 arbitration meeting with Sue and her attorney, Bill hadn't come near Sue. He had manipulated bank accounts, stocks, and vehicles, and had misused credit cards, but he hadn't hurt her physically since she'd asked him to leave. Bill Jensen now weighed over 400 pounds, and according to him, he had a bad knee, a bad back, diabetes, chronic fatigue syndrome, depression, hypertension, cardiac problems, festering skin infections, and cancer. He was broke and had no means of support other than his disability payments. He cried to anyone who would listen that his wife was very wealthy. On May 1, 2003, Jensen described his predicament. "She has used her wealth and strength to put me out on the street and nearly caused me to become a street person." Mrs. Jensen clearly decided she no longer wanted to live with a disabled man suffering from leukemia. He wrote in an attempt to have John Compattery censured by the Washington State Bar for unprofessional conduct. "So she threw me out on the street in June 2001. Ms. Jensen has so flagrantly lied, put on a charade, and erred to everyone, her attorneys, judges, prosecutors, family, friends, and our children, that I am some sort of drug-addicted and violent man. This I am not." How dangerous could he actually be? And where was he? The general feeling was that Bill Jensen had gone underground in Las Vegas, hiding there to avoid arrest. It had been his habit to run to Nevada whenever he felt he was going to be in trouble with court orders. But he could not hide forever. When he came back to the Bellevue area, Bill Jensen was arrested and booked into the King County Jail. It was May 29, 2003. As an ex-cop, he was housed in a maximum security section of the jail, administrative segregation, or as prisoners called it, the hole. It was a pot of cells earmarked for those who needed to be in protective custody or who might be a danger to others. In one of the sea tanks on the 11th floor, each man was housed in a single cell and was allowed out into the day room area alone for only an hour a day. This time, Bill Jensen didn't bail out. He had used up his own money, and his father, who was now in his 80s, no longer wanted to risk losing his home. Bill's latest attorney told him he would probably be in jail until the end of July, when his case would come to court. At first, those who feared what Bill might do next heaved a sigh of relief. Sue didn't have to worry about something awful happening at Jenny's graduation ceremonies. Her father wouldn't be able to attend. Their family and friends had a happy celebration, cheering as Jenny received her diploma. It was only a short respite, but even that was welcome. And yet, with this slight cessation of anxiety, Sue began to question herself, wondering if she had tried hard enough to preserve her marriage. Was there something more she could have done to make it possible for Jenny and Scott to have a father? When she read the Bible, the words seemed to say that divorce was wrong. She had always been a woman who tried to do the right thing, and although she never wanted to live with Bill Jensen again, she felt a little sorry for him, locked up in jail. She was on the teeter-totter of emotions that so many battered women experience. Her attorney and her closest friends rushed to validate her bravery in following through with Bill's arrest. They would not allow her to slip back into the way she had always rationalized the bad times in her marriage, by shoving abuse, intimidation, and blame far back into her unconscious mind. Women who have never been the object of domestic violence roll their eyes when they hear that Sue had even a moment's doubt, but women who have been there understand her ambivalence. She turned to Diane Wettendorf's site for help in dealing with this next escalation of her long divorce action. Bill would be out of jail soon enough, and she read that she had to be ready to hide, to run, to testify against him if necessary. Told that Scott and Jenny would probably have to be interviewed, and perhaps even testify, her heart sank. Sue had hoped they wouldn't be drawn into this tangle any more than they had been. Sue's fear came back, blooming stronger than ever. She had a safety plan, but when she studied domestic violence cases, particularly cases involving police officers, she realized it was very rare for those convicted to receive more than token sentences. "I am afraid," she said, "that without further assistance, short of having to disappear, I will most likely be targeted by my husband as soon as he is released. I know Bill well enough to know that he would eventually find me." The other prisoners in Bill Jensen's jail tank didn't know who he was, and he certainly didn't tell them he had been a cop for 20 years. Those in neighboring cells were mostly gang members, white supremacists, career criminals, and angry men who were known to start fights in jail. Bill could be very likable when he tried, and he got along with the men in other cells. All jail inmates complain about something, their old ladies. The food, cops, their attorneys. Bill waited until he understood the dynamics in his pot of cells, and then he confided that he'd been screwed over by a woman in his life. It wasn't as if the pod inhabitants were all sitting around the tables in the day room. Only one of them could be out at a time. But their cells were close enough together that they could carry on conversations, and the man who was out of his cell for his hour could stop by and visit all the other prisoners. They could trade candy bars, envelopes, items needed in their segregated world. Part of the mystique of being in jail or prison is the challenge to put something over on corrections officers. Notes are smuggled, or whispers are passed from one cell to another until messages get to the intended recipient. Most of the men in Bill Jensen's pod were repeat offenders and adept at evaluating new guys. They listened now to Jensen and saw that he was highly disturbed about situations he couldn't attend to while he was locked up. The rumor in the tank was that Jensen had money, possibly big money, but he was playing things close to his vest. Yancey Carather's asterisk was a frequent flyer in the King County Jail. Indeed, he felt as much at home in jail as he did anywhere else, and didn't really mind being arrested again and again. Yancey was proud to be known as a kind of career criminal, and often bragged that he'd been trained by his father to be an above-average practitioner of crime from the time he was a child. He took pride in the fact that he knew most of the guards in the jail as well as the inmate regulars. Yancey knew which prisoners were important in their gangs, who was planning an escape, and what the messages circulating in the tank were about. He knew how to send kites, notes, to jail management in a discreet manner. Yancey had a long rap sheet. He had numerous convictions for VUXA, violation of Uniformed Controlled Substance Abuse drugs, drunkenness, and assault. He liked to hint that he had been involved in far more violent felonies, although he stopped short of spelling out the details. Yancey Carather's was nearing middle age, and his craggy face was marked by the indulgences he'd chosen. He looked somewhat older than he really was. He was as rail-thin as Bill Jensen was overweight, about 5'10", with dark, longish hair. A man full of nervous mannerisms, he was smart and streetwise, and he let it be known to his fellow prisoners that he would do almost anything for money or for drugs. Whenever Yancey Carather's went to jail, he invariably ended up in the protective custody tank. He had a reputation for starting fights in jail, and the jail supervisors didn't bother putting him in with the general population, knowing that, inevitably, there would be a fight with Yancey in the middle of it. He himself wasn't sure why he tended to hit other prisoners in jail, but there was something about the county jail that made him want to fight. He may have known the reason very well. Whenever he came into jail, it was fresh off an arrest for being drunk or high on drugs, and in that state he was quite combative. He claimed to be a pussycat by the time he got to prison after weeks or months in jail. He hadn't had a drink or drugs for some time, so he wasn't inclined to fight. Despite his awesome number of arrests, and his tendency to act first and think later. Yancey had a sentimental side. He had lost the woman he loved, and even though they'd never married, he considered himself a widower. On June 17, 2003, Yancey Carruthers found himself in the same protective custody tank as Bill Jensen, North 11, Lower B Housing Unit. There weren't many white prisoners there at the time, and he felt that drew them together initially. Among his other talents, Yancey was an artist. He drew portraits and animals, and he was pretty good. Occasionally, he decorated envelopes for other prisoners in exchange for favors, and sometimes he just passed the time in his cell by sketching. Yancey was aware of the big man named Bill who waddled painfully around the day room, but he waited as always for the stranger to approach him. Bill was out in the day area for his hour of comparative freedom when he stopped outside Yancey's cell and began a conversation. They touched lightly on a number of subjects, feeling each other out. Yancey considered himself something of an expert on the law, and they spoke a little about the justice system. He didn't know what Bill was in jail for, but the massive guy seemed to have some knowledge of different statutes, and he also talked as if he was pretty smart. Yancey could identify with that. He'd always known he was very intelligent, too, and capable of thinking way ahead of most people he dealt with. Neither man gave away much information, waiting for the other to go beyond idle chatting. They danced around like two boxers waiting to get in the first jab. Yancey was savvy about evaluating people, and he was in his element. He knew all the ropes. Bill had to be in ADSEG for some reason, although Yancey wasn't sure what it was. He didn't look gay, one of the reasons prisoners ended up in this tank. Yancey had never run into Bill before, so he figured that the guy might be a protected witness from out of state, wanted by the feds, or some kind of known troublemaker. That didn't seem likely. He was too fat to be any threat in a fight. Maybe that was why he was in protective custody. In the general population, any guy who weighed at least 400 pounds would be a target of harassment and teasing by other prisoners. The two prisoners got in the habit of stopping by each other's cells when their free hour came around. Bill told Yancey that he'd heard he was a stand-up guy. "Who told you that?" Yancey asked. Bill jerked his head toward a cell where a prisoner dressed in the white uniform of an ultra-security inmate, a gang leader, was housed. Yancey nodded as Bill went back to his own cell. There weren't that many secrets in their tank, because the men there could hear one another's conversations, even though they couldn't always see who was talking. Yancey had heard Bill complaining about how much stress he was under and all the problems he had. At first, he complained about his financial troubles, but then he said his wife was the one who had caused them. He wasn't that different from anyone else in the King County Jail. A lot of prisoners had worries about the women in their lives, and the majority of them blamed their incarceration on someone else. And for the moment, none of them could exert much control over anyone else, although the gang leaders had a certain cachet, even locked up in jail. At the time Yancey Carruthers and Bill Jensen were locked up in the tank on the 11th floor, there were, as Yancey referred to them, a couple of other gentlemen, emoji gangsters. Crips, Bloods, BGs. One of them was awaiting trial for the cold-blooded murder of a young police officer in a small King County town. When he was asked for his ID, the gang member had pulled out a gun instead. Fortunately for Bill Jensen, none of the gang members had the slightest idea he'd been a cop for 20 years. Yancey himself told Bill that he had once been in the upper echelon of a lesser-known gang, the Kings. "They all know me, all the guys in here," Yancey bragged to Bill as he polished his own image the next time they talked. "They'll vouch for me. Maybe I can help you with your problems if you told me what they are." Bill studied him for a moment or so, evaluating what he said. "Well, let me think about it. If you need any more recommendations, you can ask more of the guys here." Yancey sauntered off to take a shower. He wasn't averse to doing almost anything if the price was right. He'd be out on the street soon, in contact with his backup people, able to help the fat guy with whatever was bothering him. He didn't know if the guy really had any money. He didn't look like he did, but you never could tell, even though he was pissing and moaning about having money troubles. The guy didn't have any visitors, and didn't seem to be getting mail either. Yancey was prepared to wait and let the guy dangle. Experience had taught him not to be too eager to make a deal. Sue Jensen and her sister, Carol Harris, were going to have to face Bill in court. Every defendant has the right to face his accuser. The date of the first hearing after Bill's arrest was set, July 28, 2003. They both dreaded it, and more than that, they hoped devoutly that neither Jenny nor Scott would have to appear. Bill was in jail, and it didn't appear that he would be bailing out before their court date. That gave Sue a little sense of security, but she still jumped at sounds in the night and often stared into her rearview mirror to watch cars that had taken what seemed like too many of the same turns that she had. She had a burglar alarm, a gun, and her dog. She tried not to hover over her children and let them have as near a normal life as she could. They were very angry with her for sending their father to jail. She understood that. The 4th of July came and went, and Yancey Carruthers and Bill Jensen spent quite a bit of time talking to each other for the 2 hours each day one or the other was out of his cell. They appeared to be becoming good friends, although friendships forged in jail are by their very nature not destined to last. The choice of companionship is limited behind bars, and most prisoners go their own way when they get out. Bill even purchased one of Yancey's artistic efforts to write to his children, an envelope with a beautiful, long-stemmed red rose on the front. Yancey was released on July 10th, and he had prospects he didn't have before he met Bill Jensen. He was armed with a phone number that belonged to a woman who lived near Bremerton, Washington. Bill had given it to him. It belonged to Bill's older sister Iris. Within an hour of his walking out of the King County Jail, Yancey Carruthers called Iris. She was expecting his call, but she waited until he gave her an agreed-upon password, Flying Kings. He and Bill came up with that, honoring the gang that Yancey had once belonged to. "Oh, yes," she responded. "Bill told me you would be calling. I was wondering why you didn't call me last night. I didn't get a midnight release, like I thought I was going to. I just got out." Iris Pate and Yancey Carruthers discussed when and where they would meet. She understood she was to give him some money, $500. Bill had told her that it was for his bail, and since she now held her brother's power of attorney, she was in a position to give the cash to the friend he had specified. They decided that Iris would come across Puget Sound from Kitsap County on the ferry, an hour's ride, and Yancey would meet her at the ferry dock. He told her what he looked like, and she described herself. Once Yancey had the money, he knew what he was supposed to do next. It had to be accomplished in less than 2 weeks. Bill had stressed that the timing was vital. He wanted his problems solved before July 28th. And if things worked out as he had choreographed his plan, there would be more money for Yancey, a lot more money. Yancey met Bill's sister at the ferry, counted the bills she gave him, bought her a Starbucks latte, and waved at her as she reboarded the ferry for its return run to Bremerton, completely unaware of what the cash was for. On July 23rd, Sue and Scott Jensen were home alone shortly after 9 p.m. Summer evenings in Seattle yawned on endlessly, but it was almost fully dark now. She jumped when the phone rang. The male voice on the other end of the line said he was a Seattle police detective. He told her that it was a matter of urgency for him to talk with her, and asked directions to her house. Without thinking, she gave him the address and driving directions. As soon as she hung up, Sue berated herself for being so gullible. How did she know it was really a detective who had called? It could be a setup, and she realized she had practically rolled out the red carpet for a stranger. When she heard someone knocking on her door, she sent Scott out to the back door with a cell phone, telling him that if she shouted "go," he was to dial 911 and then run to their neighbors. This was the way they lived now. Sue peered nervously through her drapes. She could see an unmarked car in front of her house, and a big man dressed in street clothes standing outside her door. He identified himself, but she didn't trust him. "Hold up your identification," she instructed. "I need to be sure who you are." He held up his badge and his police identification, and she opened the door and let him in. She had never seen him before. He explained that he was a homicide detective, not from King County, but from the Seattle Police Department. Half expecting him to slap handcuffs on her for some further complaint of Bill's, she invited him to sit down. "Mrs. Jensen," he began, "my name is Cloyd Steiger. I wanted to talk to you in person, and as soon as I could." She waited, her heart thumping. Either Bill was dead, or maybe something a lot worse had happened. Steiger seemed to be a kind man as he questioned her about her marriage and her upcoming divorce. He told Sue he needed to validate information he'd received a few hours earlier. The source of this intelligence was a little suspect, but it had the ring of truth to it. Sue gave the detective a rundown of the chaos in her life over the past few years, and he nodded. He had heard enough to go ahead with what he needed to tell her. "I want you to pack and get out of here as soon as you can. We think someone is going to try to kill you." Strangely, or perhaps not so strangely, she wasn't even shocked. She had known that she was a target for almost 2 years, and it was almost a relief to have it finally happen. "It was Bill, wasn't it?" she asked. "We think so. I know he wants to kill me," Sue said slowly. "I knew he would do it. I even went to the King County Journal editor back in February and told him that if I ended up dead, Bill would be behind it." Cloyd Steiger told Sue that the Seattle Homicide Unit had reason to believe that a plot was in place to accomplish her murder. But it wasn't just her death a contract called for. "What do you mean?" "Your sister is on the list, too," Steiger said quietly, waiting for that news to sink in before he went on. "My sister?" "Your sister and your daughter, Jenny, not my daughter." Sue had been afraid that Bill might hurt her dog, and even that he might do something to her sister, because he knew how much Carol meant to her. "I knew he'd look for a way to get under my skin and hurt me the most," Sue said, almost to herself. "And I realize he's angry enough to just do away with me, but I never dreamed that he would want the kids dead. I want you to find your kids, tell them to pack what they need for a couple days, and leave here," Steiger said. "Get a hotel, a motel. Stay with friends or relatives. But you have to get away from your house." Sue was stunned. She still couldn't comprehend that Bill would hurt their children. She simply could not visualize that Bill would do anything to either Jenny or Scott. She wondered if Cloyd Steiger had gotten some kind of garbled message. He shook his head. "All 3 of you," he repeated. "You can't tell anyone but your sister. Don't tell your children. Make up some excuse about why you have to get out of here. But we can't take a chance that your kids might tell someone." Steiger told Sue that he was working with someone who had instigated an investigation into a murder-for-hire plot, but he couldn't tell her who it was. He had only found out himself hours before, and although they were working as fast as they could, his team didn't know all the facts yet. They knew of a couple of people who might be involved, but there was the possibility that the person who wanted her family dead had hired additional people. As soon as the Seattle detective left her house, Sue called her daughter. Jenny was out with friends, and when Sue reached her and told her that it would be better if she didn't come home for a few days, that it would be a good idea if she stayed at her best friend's house, her daughter thought she had gone nuts. "But it was safer for her to stay away from us," Sue said. "I let her think I was acting wacko. It would keep her from asking me questions I couldn't answer." Scott didn't know what was wrong, but he quickly caught his mother's fear. He didn't resist when she told him they had to leave their house right away. Both Scott and Jenny had been angry with Sue most of the summer. Still halfway loyal to their father and sorry for him because he was in jail. Now she was once again interrupting their attempts to have fun. But she was adamant when she told Jenny not to come home and Scott to cancel his plans with his friends. Sue, Scott, and their Great Dane, Goliath, were in their car in no time. She called John Compattery on her cell phone, and he told her to drive to someplace out in public like the nearby strip mall or a theater, while he called to verify that Cloyd Steiger actually was a homicide detective with the Seattle Police Department. Someone had been stalking both Sue and her attorney, and neither accepted strangers at face value. Sue's instincts told her to trust Steiger, but she no longer believed in her own perception. In her car, Sue called her sister and told her with code words that they were all in danger and needed to leave their homes. Scott was sitting next to Sue when she did that, and she couldn't come right out and tell Carol what was wrong. Luckily, the two sisters understood each other so well that Carol caught on right away. They discussed getting on a plane. But where would they go? Maybe they debated they should go in different directions to throw off anyone who might be following them. Sue's adrenaline was coursing through her veins, and the darkness beyond the lights of the mall seemed to hide watching eyes. Compadre called to say that Cloyd Steiger was who he said he was, and that was slight comfort. Only slight. Sue called around to try to find rooms in a motel, and hoped she could take their dog, too. Sneaking a Great Dane into a motel or hotel wouldn't be nearly as easy as if they had a poodle or a Pomeranian. As it turned out, it didn't matter. There were no motel rooms available. Seattle's Seafair celebration had just begun, and thousands of tourists were in the city to enjoy it, filling hotels and motels located within a 30-mile radius of Seattle. It was after 1 a.m. Everyone was exhausted, and it looked as though they had no choice but for Sue and Scott to move into Carol's house. That wasn't an ideal solution, but at least it was away from their house. From what Cloyd Steiger had told Sue, it sounded as though someone knew exactly where she, Jenny, and Scott lived, what cars they drove, almost everything about them. Someone could be outside in the trees watching their house right now, waiting for Sue and Scott to come back home to take a beat on them with a high-powered rifle as they got out of their car. No, they couldn't go home. Sue wished that she could tell Scott and Jenny what was going on. If she could, they wouldn't be giving her such a hard time. They probably believed she'd really gone crazy. It might have been easier if she had. Yancey Carruthers had enjoyed his freedom for a very short time. He had accomplished some of the items on his mental to-do list, but he drank too much one night and found himself back in the King County Jail. Once there, he was gripped by anxiety, and he made a number of attempts to get a letter to Bill Jensen and sent kites out to someone he had worked with before. Yancey also tried to place a number of collect phone calls, the only way jail prisoners can call out. At last, he had connected. On July 24th, Bill Jensen had an unexpected visitor. A very attractive young black woman named Lisa was waiting for him in the visiting area. She had a great body, and her hair was done in an intricate series of cornrows. Jensen walked to stall 4 and sat down. Lisa took a seat opposite him, and they each picked up a phone on their sides of the glass partition. "Hi," she said, smiling. "I'm Lisa." "Hi, I'm William. Nice to meet you." Lisa explained that Y was in jail again because he'd been arrested for failing to check in with his probation officer. "Oh," Bill Jensen said, looking somewhat relieved. "I thought I got scammed." "Is he in here now?" She quickly explained that he was, but that it wasn't because of any trouble about Bill's business transaction with him. "Good. I didn't know what happened. I thought everything went sideways." Lisa shook her head slightly, and then discreetly removed a white envelope from her bra, opened it, and removed a sheet of yellow legal paper. She held the bottom quarter of it up to the glass partition so Bill could read it. It was a letter of introduction from Yancey. As he read, Lisa saw a corrections officer heading toward them, and she grabbed the note and hid it between her legs. She made small talk until the guard moved on, and then put the note up to the glass again. Bill read swiftly, and then said, "Okay, I got it." Lisa tore the note into small pieces, put it back in the envelope, and sealed it. "Good, good," Bill said, satisfied that Yancey had sent her. "You supposed to sign out a prescription and some pills from your property to me?" Lisa asked. "Oh shit," he stammered. "I can't do it. I thought I got scammed, and my sister came and got all my property." "What's the message for Y?" she asked. "Okay, let me think. Okay, tell him it's a go." Lisa told him she was concerned that the pain pills were gone. Y's brother wanted the pills to do his part of the plan. "Can't you get them from your sister?" "No, there's not any way, not without raising suspicions. Just tell him it's a go." Lisa explained that Y had a different visitor's day, and she wouldn't be seeing him today to tell him that Bill hadn't come through with his part of the deal. "I can have the other half of the money by the 14th, he promised. She told him that Yancey didn't go for people changing plans on him. She ticked off the instructions Bill had for Yancey on her fingertips, asking, "Anything else?" "Yeah. Tell him it has to be done by the 1st, because my trial starts the 4th or 5th of August. Lisa seemed very concerned that she had all Bill's orders memorized, and she asked him to repeat them several times. He nodded, and then added, "Just tell him that I don't have the money now because I thought I got scammed. I let my sister use the money to pay bills. He'll understand. I won't have the money as soon as he wants it, but it's guaranteed. Tell him, just go ahead and do it." She seemed to have the message all straight, and Lisa explained that I wanted her to come see him on Saturday, July 26th, but she said that she probably wouldn't be able to come back to see Bill until Thursday, July 31st. That would be cutting it close for his timeline, but he nodded. "Did you have to sign in to see me?" Bill asked, almost as an afterthought. "Yes," she said, "but signing in wasn't a problem. I used my sister's name. Anything else you want me to tell why?" "Yeah. Tell him good luck." "How will you know it's done?" Lisa asked. "I have to come back and let you know when it's done?" "Just tell him to do it and I'll know. I'll get the message when it's done." "Okay. Bye. See you later." "Thank you. Nice meeting you." "Bye." Lisa was able to come back and to see Bill Jensen on Saturday, July 26th. He seemed far more at ease with her on her second visit. She told him she had received a letter from Yancey. He wasn't going to get out of jail until the 4th, and that would be too late to do the job Bill wanted. So everything that he wants us to do is just going to be me and his brother. That seemed to alarm Bill Jensen. He explained that his sister was getting suspicious because she'd called Yancey's phone and it was disconnected. She'd spent some of the money he owed Yancey. He thought it might be better if he paid Yancey the other half himself after he got out of jail. He didn't even know how much money was left. Lisa asked Bill where he was getting the money. "Did Yancey know?" "Yeah, he knows." Lisa asked him when they would be together. She meant Sue and her sister, but she didn't want to say it aloud. "The only time you think they will absolutely be together is Monday before court?" "Yeah." Bill was nervous and said he wondered if the jail phones were recording their conversation. "Nah," Lisa said. "I've been in jail a bunch of times. They're old. They're not recording. They're not. They hardly fucking work." Bill seemed to relax when she reassured him. He repeated that the two women would be coming to the pretrial hearing together on July 28th. "Do you know where they're going to be?" she asked. "Well, I know the one will be coming down from Kirkland, the sister-in-law." "And will she go by and get your wife?" "Probably." "They going to have anybody with them?" "They're just going to be the two of them, probably." "Okay. Where is your daughter going to be?" "She's probably going to be home." "At your house?" "Yeah." "So if we catch them at the house, leaving, we can get your daughter too?" "Probably." "Now the son will probably be in there, too." Lisa sounded surprised. "Oh, I didn't know you had a son." "Yeah." "Wait a minute," she said, flustered. "I'm confused." "Well, I ain't. Nobody mentioned no son to me." Bill hastened to explain that his son would be no problem for them. He was only 15. "Is he big?" Lisa asked suspiciously. Bill assured Lisa that Scott wasn't a huge teenage football player type and wouldn't give them any trouble. It probably wouldn't be difficult for Lisa and Yancey's brother working together to overcome him. Now Bill Jensen described his sister-in-law's blue Volkswagen and Sue's 1988 Mustang convertible, but when Lisa asked how to get to his family's house, he looked worried. He had been in jail for 2 months, and he'd noticed that the address had been left off when he'd been served with the last protection order. He mused aloud that Sue might have sold the house and moved. "Can she sell it without you?" "Yeah, it's a long story, but she's got full ownership right now." "Can your sister find out if she's still living in it?" "Does your wife talk to your sister?" "No. If she did move, she wouldn't want me to know about it anyway." "Like, where? What's your wife look like?" Bill Jensen described Sue and then Carol, giving their height, weight, hair color, age. His voice was as calm as if he was telling a sales clerk about them as he bought a present of clothes. Lisa repeated the car descriptions. And then she asked about Jenny. Your baby got a car? I don't think so. She asked about his son. You don't want nothing to happen to your son, right? Not particularly. No, not particularly. All right, we can leave him then? If we can get them away, even if we have to, like, tie him up, knock him out something, but we can leave him there. Yeah. What if something happens to him? Lisa asked. Oh, well. For a moment, Lisa's world-weary attitude faltered, and then she nodded. All right. She could tell that Bill Jensen was calmly prepared to see his whole family gone. Now he warned her that Sue wore an alarm button on a chain around her neck. If she activated it, it would call the Bellevue police. Lisa asked Bill to tell her both addresses, reminding him that she had to memorize them until she walked out of the building. She didn't want the jail guards to see her writing anything down. She repeated the addresses over and over. Next, Bill described what the house in Newport Hills looked like, including the 70-foot sequoia tree in the front yard. Finally impatient, Bill reminded Lisa that Yancey had all that information already. I know, she said, but he ain't out. She was getting antsy, even though Yancey had reassured her it would be easy. He keeps telling me on the phone, you can take care of this. You can do this. This ain't going to be hard. They ain't going to put up a fight. Yeah, Bill interrupted, eager to calm her down. It looked like it was going to be Lisa and some guy, probably Yancey's brother, who would carry out his instructions. How old is your daughter? What's she look like? She's 18. Jenny? Jenny, all right. Jenny. Sue. Carol. She's pretty, Bill said about his daughter. Kind of light brown hair. About 5'7", 5'8". And she's in good shape. Athlete, basketball, softball. She's a good athlete. Lisa asked Bill if he wanted her to take his family away from the house. Yeah. I was hoping that, Yancey was going to try to make it look like it was an accident. But, all right, that's cool. So we ain't trying to make it look like they just packed up and left, and you gotta wait. They ain't nobody heard from them, right? Bill admitted he was nervous getting so many people involved, knowing what was going to happen. Lisa reminded him there were only 3, Yancey, herself, and Yancey's brother. As far as she was concerned, she was going back east with her kids, using fake ID, and would be long gone. She wouldn't be talking to anyone. Bill assured her that there would be big dollars, although Yancey knew that they would have to wait on that. It's all going to come through, the estate process. You know what I'm saying? They had talked for a long time, speaking through the glass with phones held to their ears. Whenever Lisa mentioned money, $500 that Bill was apparently supposed to give to Yancey before August 4th. Bill returned to how chagrined he was that 10 days had gone by after Yancey bailed out before Lisa showed up. He had felt like a patsy, like someone had duped him, although that seemed to have little to do with the money Yancey wanted now. Bill Jensen kept repeating his grievances. Lisa said she owed Yancey because he'd been cool with her when she was down on her luck. He tells me this is going to work and I'm cool with that. I ain't asking for no money. But I don't know you from Adam's house, cat. What was she supposed to tell Yancey? Was she supposed to say he had to wait for the big money? Right? Bill told Lisa that his sister had had the second payment all ready to give Yancey, $500. That she'd been Johnny on the spot, but Yancey hadn't shown up. So it was his own fault that he didn't have that money. I don't want any more suspicions from my sister, he cautioned. We need someplace to stay, Lisa argued. I'm giving up my apartment. If we do this by the 1st, I don't want to be there. Of course she and Yancey needed to have a car. There were other expenses to be paid. Bill insisted that he didn't know how much money his sister still had after the bills he told her to pay. She may have maybe only $500 or $700 left. I don't know. Are you going to be able to get more? Lisa pressed. 'Cause when we do this, we gotta go. I can't see us staying around. No, I understand. Bill soothed her. I explained to him that when this was done, there's a shitload of money in each estate that should roll my way, but I don't know how long it's going to take to get that out. It's all a legal process, but it's all there. You see what I'm saying? She did, but Lisa kept asking Bill Jensen questions. And he was apparently so anxious to have his wife, daughter, and sister-in-law dead within the next week that he was willing to explain in detail just how much money he would receive from their estates. The house is paid for. It's a $400,000 house with no debt on it. She seemed to be impressed. And she wondered how he'd made that much money being a computer geek. I did okay, he said succinctly. Bill admitted that he was a little worried that his wife might have rewritten some documents that would make everything roll to his son. You want us to get him too? She asked again. Well, it's a possibility. Yeah. Yancey doesn't do minors. I wouldn't want to hurt him, but there it was. Bill Jensen didn't want anyone between himself and what he estimated was Sue's and Carol's million-dollar fortune, and he realized now that his son would probably stand ahead of him in the money line. Lisa assured him that Yancey would be pissed to hear that Scott was now part of the hit. He wouldn't want to kill a boy. Bill had come to a decision. It had to be all four of his relatives. There wasn't anyone else who would prevail over him when the estates were probated. Even if Yancey didn't like it, he instructed Lisa. Well, my suggestion then is clean house. Although he spoke cryptically, she knew what he meant. Bill had promised Yancey $100,000, and he was now willing to add a $50,000 bonus if everything went right. Lisa countered with $50,000 per person, $200,000 for all four. Bill disagreed, saying that he had heard the going rate for hits was $20,000 to $30,000 per person. She wondered how he knew that, but she told him he would have to work it out with Yancey. That wasn't her department. Bill was still worried that something might go wrong, and if it did, he told Lisa, she and Yancey and the other man had to promise to keep their mouths shut. I'm gone, Lisa said. You don't know me. My real name ain't on nothing I've been using. Everybody's on their own. That's the kind of people we are. Just make it look like an accident, Bill Jensen said. If you can. All right. Got it. Okay. And she had indeed got it. Lisa, a.k.a. Seattle Police Detective Sharon Stevens, walked back to the homicide unit with a crystal-clear recording of her conversation with Bill Jensen. Jensen himself returned to his cell, pleased that he had managed to carry out such a clever plan to wreak vengeance on his estranged wife. Whether he truly believed that there was a huge fortune awaiting him when his wife, his sister-in-law, and his two children were dead, only he knew. He had whittled away at the bank accounts and stock portfolios he and Sue once had until they were much diminished. But he had bragged to Lisa, who was really an extremely effective detective, as well as a brilliant actress, that there was big money ahead. If, indeed, there was, one would suspect that Bill Jensen might do his best to avoid sharing much of it with Yancey Carruthers and his partners in crime. It may have been that revenge was even more important to Jensen than an inheritance. He had seethed for weeks when he found himself in jail. He'd always considered himself far smarter than his wife. He'd controlled her, lied to her, even terrorized her, and yet she was free and he was locked up. He smiled a grim little smile as he entered his cell, confident that he would be out soon. How could he be convicted of felony domestic violence if there were no witnesses against him? And he was sure now that by his court date there would be no living witnesses left. Yancey Carruthers wasn't exactly the hero type, but he had his ethics and his point of no return. As he had spent more time listening to what Bill Jensen wanted him to do, he'd been more and more revolted. The guy was perfectly willing to kill his own family. Yancey's wife had worked the streets, but he'd loved her, and he still grieved for her. She had been a murder victim. He figured if a man was lucky enough to have a wife and a couple of kids, he should be grateful. But Bill was eager to throw them away for money. Yancey had helped police before, solved a few murders for them, and he was proud of that. He wasn't a snitch who went running to tell on someone for every little picky thing they did, but it made him feel important and worthwhile to know he'd saved some lives. Now, Yancey had become the person who stood between two terrified women and two teenagers and someone bent on destroying them. That was a very large responsibility for someone who spent his life tiptoeing between being a prisoner and being a regular citizen, always living on the edges of society and looking for a quick buck and an easy way to get forbidden drugs. He had thought about ripping the man named Bill off, and he'd taken the money from his sister down at the ferry dock. He'd been willing to take the pain pills and prescriptions for more that Bill had in his property box, too, but Bill had outfoxed him there. But would Yancey Carruthers really kill for innocent people to make $150,000? No. Would he step forward to save for people he didn't even know, even though it might cost him his own life? That he wasn't so sure about. But in the end, he found himself worrying about the intended victims, afraid that Bill would simply find somebody else to do it if he wasn't stopped. Yancey realized he wasn't a killer, or someone who could order a hit on innocent victims. Bill Jensen wouldn't find out all the details of how he'd been found out, not for months. Still, wheels were turning. Bill had only a few days to congratulate himself on his clever plan before it ended in ashes.